On today's episode, I'm sitting down with R. Keith Loftin. Dr. Loftin is a professor of philosophy and apologetics at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he recently helped write a book called Stand Firm, Apologetics and the Brilliance of the Gospel. It's a really great book. I've obviously read it myself and recommend it to you. It's a good introduction to apologetics and Christian philosophy. And not only does it go through some arguments for God, Jesus, and the Bible, it talks about the nature of truth and things like that, of a more philosophical nature and substance, but also it talks about how the gospel is not only true, but beautiful and good and attractive. And this is, I thought, was a unique contribution as well as an important contribution because when we're talking with skeptics or people of different faith, non-believers in general, not only does Christianity need to resonate with their intellect, but also with their heart, if you'll allow for that sort of analogy. We don't just care if something's true. We want to know, is it good? And it seems actually that is a perfect approach to today's culture, in which we think more with our hearts than our head, so to speak. And so people today really want to know, is Christianity good at all? Because there seems to be the idea that it's not, that religion is bad, especially Christianity, Christianity has shaped the United States in all its bad ways or whatever. I don't really know exactly what they're saying. But anyway, it's important that we be able to articulate why Christianity is not only true, but beautiful. And the book does a beautiful job of doing exactly that. I think you'll enjoy the episode, so I'll shut up. We can get to the interview now. Don't forget to share, like, review. Give us a review on the podcast if you're listening. And don't forget to head on over to the Patreon page. There's a link in the description if you want to listen to or watch the bonus segment with Dr. Loftin, 5 more minutes with Dr. Loftin. And we discuss a few more things over there. You can become a supporter of the show for as little as $1. Let's get to the episode. My name's Hayden Clark. This is Help Me Believe. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Help Me Believe, the show about Christian apologetics and theology. My name is Hayden Clark, your host, and I'm excited to introduce my special guest to you. He is a professor of philosophy and apologetics at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and he is the author of the book of today's discussion, which is called Stand Firm, Apologetics and the Brilliance of the Gospel. Dr. R. Keith Loftin, how are you doing this morning, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I'm sure you got a busy schedule, so I'm really glad to have you on, sporting the Starbucks coffee. All right, man.
It's a good way to wrap up spring break week.
Yeah, for sure. So before we get into the book and some questions that I have for you about the book, if you don't mind kind of introducing yourself to the audience for those who may not be familiar with you.
Well, Keith Loftin, I've been here at Southwestern Seminary as well as the undergrad college here, Scarborough College, for 7 years. I got interested in apologetics when I was an undergraduate at Bible College, had a fantastic apologetics prof, Dr. Stephen Cowan, who edited the 5 U's book on apologetic method, and sort of got hooked from there.
All right. Well, so you have you taught anywhere else besides Southwestern, or kind of what's your academic history?
I did. I taught at my alma mater, Southeastern Bible College. Was a small Bible college in Birmingham, Alabama that sadly became defunct and doesn't exist any longer. I hope that my time there didn't have a causative effect. And so that's where I taught previously to coming here to Scarborough College.
Okay. So do you kind of travel and speak at apologetics conferences, go to churches and stuff like that, or?
I do, not as often as others do, but I love the chances I get. I just returned from a week in Hawaii and Honolulu at a lovely church where a friend of mine is the pastor, a church called Waialae Baptist Church. And J.P. Moreland and I spoke for them, their Waterhouse lecture series. And it was a great time to be with sort of a hero in defending the faith, J.P. Moreland, and helping the church there.
Well, that's awesome, man. Down there in Hawaii, suffering for the Lord. I know
Burn
that.
for the Lord. It was beautiful. It was just a beautiful place.
Yeah. Well, I've read the book. I don't have a hard copy. I read the digital copy, and it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. Um, Maybe you could explain to the audience maybe what kind of unique contribution that this book offers to the apologetic world. There's a few books out there on apologetics. So maybe what does Stand Firm offer uniquely that maybe other books don't?
Well, thanks for asking that. Um, I co-wrote the book with my very dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Travis Dickinson and Dr. Paul Gould. Excuse me. In fact, Dr. Gould just published another excellent book on cultural apologetics that came out this week.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
It's an excellent book, by the way. He'd love to come on and talk to you about it.
Oh, thank you for speaking for him.
So Dr. Dickinson and Dr. Gould and I taught together here at Scarborough College. And we, of course, teach, we have an MA in apologetics here, and we teach apologetics to the undergraduates as well. And we tried different textbooks, and there are, as you mentioned, there's a lot of really good books by J.P. Moreland, Paul Copan, and William Lane Craig, guys that we really look up to a lot. But we just couldn't find a book that we thought satisfactorily presented all of the full waterfront of topics that we believed need to be covered in a class. And then also, we couldn't find a book that we thought portrayed the truth of the Christian worldview, not only in terms of its brilliance, that is, its logical attractiveness, if you like, but also its beauty, which I hope we'll get a chance to talk about a little later.
For sure. Yeah. So I think as I was reading, I picked up on that aspect of the gospel not only being true but also being beautiful. It's kind of a unique contribution. So I figured that was probably where you would go with that, and we'll probably get to that here in a little bit. But first of all, I was kind of hoping we could define some terms so that people kind of knew what we were talking about. So when we talk about, let's just start base level here. When we talk about apologetics, what is it that we're talking? Are we apologizing for something, or like what are we talking about here?
It seems like every year, I teach the intro to apologetics class, and it's kind of a running gag with apologists, but it never fails. Somebody in the room just doesn't understand why we're requiring a course in learning how to be penitent for being a Christian. Yeah. Why do we need to apologize for being Christian? And so I have to sort of explain, no, that's not really what it's about. Yeah, the question, what is apologetics? As I'm sure your listeners will be well aware, we see a few times this terrific Greek word apologia used in the New Testament. It's a familiar Greek word outside of the New Testament as well. We see it if you read Plato's Apology, at the story of Socrates going on trial on these sort of trumped up charges for promoting atheism and corrupting the youth. He is giving his apologia before the public court system. The Apostle Paul, when he goes before the governor, and then Peter in 1 Peter 3:15, when he says that we need to be ready to give a defense. It's that word apologia, and it doesn't mean self-defense. This isn't like the Karate Kid kind of a thing. It's more like a legal defense, of preparing your case. We're acting in behalf of the gospel to as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10, to tear down poor ideas that are raised up as obstructions to believing in the Lord and the gospel. And it's, in my view, it's more than just trying to show the rationality of the faith, although certainly that is involved in it. I think that there is an evangelistic bent or end to apologetics done correctly. We are trying to persuade people that the Christian worldview is in fact true.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely, I would think an evangelistic end, as you said, to apologetics. And I don't think you've properly done apologetics if you haven't. Tied it in with evangelism. So there's this chapter on truth and knowledge, and I really like that chapter for sure. It got pretty philosophical pretty quick. That's probably why I liked it so much. That's where my mind tends to float. But what is truth? You know, we live in a culture where, you know, there's your truth and my truth and Oprah's truth and whoever's truth. But so, what is truth? That's an interesting question. What is truth?
It's been said that Oprah is America's favorite theologian.
Yeah.
Sadly, that may be true.
It may be.
So I need to give my colleague Dr. Dickinson here credit for he's the professional epistemologist on the team,
Yeah.
and he was the primary author of the chapter that you referred to, and he did a fabulous job. We think that truth is as traditionally conceived. You can find this as far back as Aristotle's Metaphysics. Maybe it's lines 1122 or 1110, 25d, thereabouts, where he says this seemingly funny statement, but if you listen close, I think he's got it. He says that to say of what is that it is not, and to say of what is not that it is false, and to say of what is that it is, and of what is not that it is not, is true. So it sounds like a riddle, but it's just a really sort of a pedantic spelling out of what seems to us correct. Truth is this relationship that obtains between sentences or thoughts or propositions or ideas and reality. So if it's in fact raining outside my office window and I form the belief that it is not raining outside my office window, well then, as Aristotle put it, that I'm saying of what is not that it is, and therefore I have a false belief, or truth fails to obtain. So truth has sometimes been called this relationship of correspondence between those propositions and the way that reality actually is.
Okay. So you kind of took it from just kind of looking at the world and saying this is kind of how we describe things, but is there any kind of like a proof or something that, you know, because somebody may, you know, sometimes people will counter and say, you know, well, that may be true for you, but it's not for me. So how do you kind of prove that, no, truth definitely is objective and we know what is true? And so how do you prove that to folks who...
You do run into this kind of question a lot these days, don't you?
Yeah.
We do want to leave room for opinion. People do have different opinions. Some people have a really nasty opinion that the Dallas Cowboys are the team to cheer for.
A nasty opinion?
Well, and we all, I think, believers know that the New Orleans Saints are who
okay.
you ought to cheer for. But that is a matter of opinion, of course. There's no really objective matter. No, you know, you're not objectively incorrect for cheering for the Dallas Cowboys. There may be moral issues in the neighborhood. But when it comes to factuality or being incorrect or correct, I don't think there's clearly an issue there. And it does seem that there's a lot of gray areas when it comes to issues that seem to be matters of fact. For example, end-of-life ethical issues, or the proper way to interpret difficult books from history, say a book by Nietzsche or Plato's Republic or something. So it seems like these are matters of fact. It either is or is not morally appropriate to, you know, pull the plug on someone in a coma. And it can be difficult to ascertain what is the correct or incorrect course of action, but it doesn't mean that it's a matter of relativity, so that it's right for you and wrong for us. Well, something is either morally right or morally wrong, simpliciter. And so we want to leave room for that too. We're not denying that there are really genuinely tough issues out there. Thinking areas of advanced physics, philosophy of mathematics. They're really hard issues, but the difficulty in ascertaining what is true shouldn't be conflated with the claim that there is no objective fact of the matter. So even with those provisos in mind, I do think that there are some good reasons to not think that what's true for you is not true for me and vice versa. Paul Copan has a really nice little book called When God Goes to Starbucks.
Mhm.
And he does a good job also of sort of dealing with that kind of comes up at Starbucks caliber,
Yeah.
objection. Um, so, sorry, I've sort of lost
Oh no,
my.
you're fine. Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
yeah.
so I think you gave a pretty good explanation there. So another term that often really needs to be defined, but often isn't, because we just, sometimes in the conversation or debate, we forget to stop and define our terms. But another common term that's misused and is worth defining is the word faith.
Yeah.
In fact, I think if we would define this word properly before all of our debates and conversations with skeptics, things would go a whole lot better. So how do we define the word faith?
Well, that just really resonates with me the way you put that. If only.
Yeah, if
If
only.
only people in the church, frankly, often had a clearer or more filled out understanding of what is faith. So Richard Dawkins sort of famously or infamously says that faith is believing in the face of evidence or even in the teeth of evidence.
Yeah.
I just think, oh my goodness, every time I watch a television show or a movie and the characters having a real crisis of some sort, and they're encouraged to just, you got to have faith. You got to just take a leap. The idea is you just blindly dive into a situation, sort of hoping for the best, but not really having a basis. Oh, I just cringe every time.
Yeah, for sure.
But even worse when I hear believers say the same thing.
Yeah.
So what is faith? Well, I think there's a few threads that would have to be wound together to get the full version of or the full concept in mind. Faith is, of course, a matter of belief. It's true that in virtue of having faith, Christians are said to believe certain things, so that I don't think that you have a historic Christian faith apart from believing at least a handful of backbone concepts that God exists, that Jesus is truly the Son of God, and that sin is a reality and that it has caused a rift between us and the Creator, that Jesus has come incarnate in the person of that second person Trinity has come incarnate in the person of Jesus of Nazareth to provide redemption and so forth. So and others, so I do think that faith involves belief, but it involves more than, as is sometimes put, the assent to factual claims. Mm-hmm. Faith is a relationship, of course. And here's where I think apologetics is useful but often overlooked. So I tell my students that this December, my wife Julie and I will hit 15 years of being married.
Congratulations.
Well, thanks a lot. It seems odd that time has gone by so quickly.
Yeah, I'm 2 months in. So
2 months in, wow. we dated for 2 months and got engaged.
No way. That's awesome.
Maybe put that out. I don't want your viewers thinking I recommend it. So I have a lot of faith in Julie, and I had a lot of faith in her when we got married. It'd be odd to marry someone initially in whom you don't have faith.
Yeah.
But I have a whole lot more faith in her now than I did, 2 months in, or 5 years in, or 10 years in. And the reason is obvious to anyone in the same situation in life. I have increased faith in Julie precisely because I have a longer track record from her of reasons and evidence for thinking her trustworthy.
Yeah.
This is very similar, by the way, to the initially very odd situation of God directing Abraham to sacrifice his son.
Yeah.
Well, you think, what in the world is wrong with Abraham even listening to something of that sort? It's his son. Well, he wouldn't have apart from a long track record of believability, a track record of evidence, trustworthiness from God.
Yeah.
And here I think apologetics can really help. A believer's faith grow. To shift the metaphor a little bit, the illustration, you have a checking account, I'm sure, and I have a checking account, and I don't even know most of the individuals there. I just give them all of my money to hold.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't just do that
Yeah.
out there just with any random person I see at Starbucks. But each time over the years, issues have come up or things have gone sideways, and with payments and this and that. The bank has done me well and has demonstrated their trustworthiness, and my faith in them has grown.
Yeah.
This is very similar to how it works in the Christian life. So I think that apologetics has a lot to offer
Mm-hmm.
in this sense of growing faith, not only defending the believability of Christian truth claims and overcoming naturalistic or counterfeit faith objections, but also in helping us conceptualize the trustworthiness of the Lord Jesus.
Yeah, I think you're touching on what I've called, or perhaps I've heard. I'm not going to make a claim that I'm the one that deemed this, but uh, the the dual purpose of apologetics, which is really to answer critics and skeptics, but also to strengthen believers.
Yeah.
It achieves both. So you would say faith is something less like a blind allegiance and more like evidence-based trust.
Yeah, I think that's a much better way to put it. Yeah, so that the relationship is this way. Something doesn't have to be proven rationally true in order to be believed by a Christian. I think that would be to accept a gift we should return from the Enlightenment,
Yeah.
sometimes called theological rationalism. But the relationship is one of support, so that the more reason that I have to believe something or in someone, then the more faith I can have. And that is opposed to the idea that there's a sliding scale this way, so that the more faith you have, the less room there is for reason. Or on the other hand, the more reason you have, the less room there is for faith. I think both of those would be mistaken. They grow together.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was going to be my next question, was the relationship between faith and reason.
All right.
But that's all right. You've got a list of them, I guess. So there's also this part in the book that I really liked, and I actually didn't make a note of it. You just made me think of it, so I hope I can describe it well enough to jog your memory. You wrote the thing, so hopefully. But there's a part where you talk about how, the old lady living out in the country who's a Christian, and she's probably, do you recall this?
Yes.
And she has probably has no access to like apologetic material and stuff. It's not unreasonable for her to believe, even though she doesn't know probably any of the arguments for God or Jesus or the Bible that you and I might be familiar with. Can you kind of touch on that?
Yeah, I think this is an important thing that needs to be kept in mind. And I'll say that a lot of apologists are sensitive to this question and are keen to be clear on this issue. We need to be careful when we define apologetics and when we teach at churches and so on to not communicate the idea that you cannot have faith, or maybe put a little more directly, that you cannot be a rational believer in the Christian worldview unless you can defend all of these things and articulate, 3 or a half a dozen really crisp arguments for God's existence, and you don't have to have a PhD or a handful of PhDs in order to be perfectly rational in holding to your faith. And I think there are a couple of good reasons to think this, but one of them is that we know people who we know of great examples from history and usually in our ordinary lives of people who are very mature in the faith, who clearly have a deep and abiding relationship with the Creator, and who have and continue to do lots of excellent work for the kingdom, who just aren't familiar with, all of the intricacies involved in the debate over the second premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, or the reasons to continue believing in the principle of sufficient reason from the Leibnizian cosmological argument. My grandmother, who's a wonderful believer in the Lord and went to Bible college, wouldn't have the first idea what those premises are, never mind the debates over them, and that's fine. But at the same time, um, oh sorry, let me stay on this thought
Sure.
here. I've got the professor's nasty habit of spotting a relevant rabbit trail and
Yeah.
immediately want to walk down it for a little ways and come back. So why is this? There have been a couple of reasons. There's one camp that is called the Reformed Epistemology camp. This is really made famous by Alvin Plantinga, who has reasons, and we tend not to go that direction in our book. But one other reason why you don't need to be an expert in apologetics or philosophy or biochemistry or string theory or whatever in order to be a rational Christian is that you have the indwelling witness of the Holy Spirit in your life if you are a believer. Mm. Now, this, as William Lane Craig has emphasized, is more a matter of how I can know, apart from reasons, rational reasons. This wouldn't be something to look to for compelling evidence to show others.
Right.
But I know whenever I'm having, times of doubt and struggle and so forth, that I am a believer because of the change in my life, the personal relationship I have, this self-authenticating witness of the Holy Spirit, as Craig puts it.
Yeah, I mean, I know, and I've said this before to the audience, the number one way that I know initially knew that Christianity was true was an experience that I had in my conversion, in my repentance and turning to Christ. And obviously my actions didn't change overnight, but my desires certainly did.
That's right.
And that was my moment of, oh, this is actually real. This is actually true. Apologetics didn't come until afterwards, and I think that's been true for most people. There are people who get who convert because they are convinced with their mind first.
Sure. Yeah. That's an important note to underscore, if you don't mind, Hayden.
Yeah, sure.
I think in our at least in the evangelical tradition, there tends to be a skepticism. No one actually ever comes to faith because of these arguments and so on.
Sure they do. Yeah.
It's really true that we don't engage in apologetics in some fruitless attempt to argue people into heaven. You can't argue anybody into heaven, of course, and you can't preach anyone into heaven. You can't pray anyone into heaven or cry anyone into heaven. But it doesn't mean we should stop preaching and praying and crying and engaging in apologetic encounters with people to try and allow ourselves to be used by the Holy Spirit, which is really what happens in any conversion. Yeah. And so think of the famous story of C.S. Lewis, Alistair McGrath in our own day, and plenty of others whose testimony is that apologetics played a critical role in their coming to faith. Yeah.
I think you just gave me a response to people who say that from now on. So they'll say, Hayden, apologetics is useless. We can't argue people into heaven. I say, well, I guess preaching's useless because we can't preach them into heaven either. I guess we should shut down the pulpits in the churches.
Yeah, no one would want to do that.
No, of course not.
There's an enormous space between apologetics is useless in that it can't argue anyone in heaven. There's a huge space between apologetics is not capable of arguing someone in heaven, and therefore apologetics is useless. Yeah. There's a lot of space between there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's get to the brilliance and the beauty of the gospel, this unique part of the book, or at least it has been in my experience with reading books on apologetics. What is it we're talking about when we talk about the beauty or the brilliance of the gospel?
Yeah, this is whenever you set out to come up with a book title, all of the best titles were hundreds of years old. You ever look at the book titles from, say, 200 years ago, and they're like 5 lines long?
Yeah,
it's like 3 or 4 sentences, and you can really see the idea. It's a pity we can't do that any longer. You have
they won't sell.
Short titles, yeah. doesn't exactly roll off the tongue when it's a
Yeah.
paragraph for a title.
Yeah.
But brilliance is a double entendre. Something is brilliant in an intellectual sense if it's, wow, very clever, really logically appealing, and so on. But there's also a sense in which you'd say of some gals just received engagement ring.
Okay.
All of the friends want to look at it, and you notice that the diamond has a certain brilliance to it,
Yeah.
right? It appears in a certain way to us.
Yeah.
So there's both senses of brilliance are in mind here, but we also think that we need to keep in mind the beauty. And so throughout the book, we attempt to argue for the rationality of Christianity. We walk through loads of arguments for God and for Christian claims, the historicity of the resurrection, not only the logical possibility of miracles, but indeed the plausibility of believing miracles actually have and do happen. We talk about counterfeit gospels, that is, other faiths that are competitors with Christianity. We talk about the nature of truth. We walk through a lot of evidence. And those things really speak to, we believe, the brilliance of the gospel. But what we believe is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes overlooked or not sufficiently discussed in apologetic books is the attractiveness of the Christian gospel. Now, to be clear, we're not saying that, boy, we really, really wish, we really feel like it would be nice if the Christian worldview were true, so we're just going to believe it. We're just going to choose to make it our truth. It's not what it's about. So to be clear, we don't believe out of some psychological crutch or some just sort of wish, like I wish cancer were not a reality, so I'm just going to believe there's no such thing. It's not that at all. We're attempting to couple with the brilliance of the gospel a clear articulation of the Christian worldview's attractiveness, and in particular, the main thesis of Christianity, the gospel. It is attractive. It's a beautiful story. And we really emphasize this at the end of the book. We try to ring the bell throughout the chapters, but we have a closing section, or perhaps even a chapter, I don't remember now, where we really accentuate the beauty of the gospel. So it's not only true, but it speaks to our longings. It helps us organize inwardly organize our soul, and outwardly orient our souls to the direction of life that is proper. Mm-hmm. That is, what's going on in the background here is just what Augustine says in the very opening line of the very first page of his terrific classic, The Confessions, that one's soul is restless until it finds rest in God. And so this is something that we agree with. So it's not a surprise then to discover that the Christian worldview is more than true, and I mean that more than true. It is the proper music to which our lives have to be tuned if they're to be played out correctly. Mm-hmm. And that's an attractive thing whenever it is seen. We think this connects us up at the most deep level of our soul.
Yeah, I may even take it a step further and say that this may actually be, I don't want to say more important, but as far as when you engage, a non-believer or somebody of a different faith, being able to articulate that the gospel is beautiful may actually be more important than especially for today's culture, in which we are extremely, I don't want to say not rational, but we're definitely more emotional than we are rational today. And some atheists will even actually admit to the beauty of the gospel and saying, yeah, it would be nice if when we died we all got together afterwards and lived on, but I'm not can't
Yeah,
force myself to believe that. I think is
right.
the way I've
Yeah.
heard some say it.
Well, it's no accident that our culture, well, it's no coincidence, I should say, that our culture follows the Enlightenment, but it also more recently follows the Romanticism of the 19th and even early 20th century. We're not that far removed from this cultural shift that you are pointing to.
Yeah, and so some have used the term post-truth, um, and if that's truth, then we do need to understand that the gospel isn't just true for a post-truth culture; it's also beautiful for a culture that is um, striving emotionally and emotionally charged and all that. Well, if you want to hear more from Dr. Loftin, you're going to have to stick around for the bonus segment, 5 more minutes with Dr. R. Keith Loftin. And I'm going to ask him a couple of more questions. But if you're not a patron, you need to go ahead and follow the link in the description and become a patron for as little as $1. We appreciate all your support, guys. Dr. Loftin, thanks so much for coming on. We'll have to do this again sometime. It's been a lot of fun.
My pleasure, Hayden. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us, guys. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, leave us a review, and head on over to the Patreon page. There's a link in the description to watch the bonus segment. You can become a supporter of the show for as little as $1 a month. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. We'll see you next time.